Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Topsy and for today's video we're going to go ahead and grade all the decks from the Speed Duel set Shadow of the Duelist in this tier list. If you haven't caught my last two videos where I went ahead and tiered the decks from the Duel Academy set alongside Midterm Paradox, I highly recommend you go and check them out. I go in depth as to why each of these decks are in the tier they are at, and in today's video we're going to be doing the same thing with the Shadow of the Duelist set. Now, before we get started, there's a few prerequisites we have to get out of the way as to how we're going to be grading each of these decks. Starting off, we're going to be grading these decks based on the 20 card deck that you get out of the box. Additionally, we're going to be using the dedicated skill each deck comes with. But besides those two prerequisites, we're also going to be judging each of these decks based on the consistency of the strategy, the power output of them, the utility of the deck, meaning what good cards they have access to, and finally just how consistently they can just perform what they're trying to do. Alright, with that all being said, let's get to it. Okay, so Shadow of the Duelist. This has to be one of my all-time favorite Speed Duel sets. This set is... it's up there. It's one of the greatest. It has so many awesome decks in it, and I'm just so excited to start grading it. If you're a returning viewer, you might see that there's been a few changes to the tier list. And that's because I went ahead and went back to them to go ahead and test them all out once again, just to get a vibe of them and whether or not I think they belong where I put them. And yeah, so there was a few changes as you can see. Starting off with, I went ahead and moved the Cyber Angel strategy to an S tier. I went ahead and moved the Ancient Gear strategy down one, just because it has a great power output, but it's not as consistent as I once thought to perform the strategy. I went ahead and moved the hero strategy down a bit as well, just because while Blazement is great to summon Nova Master, it doesn't do enough. Alright, with that all being said, let's get started. And no better way to start than with Jaden himself. And to be honest, this is honestly, it's either between a D tier strategy to like a C tier strategy. We'll give it the benefit of the doubt and put it in C tier for now. And let's discuss why. Alright then, so Supreme King Jaden is strategy revolves around the evil hero strat, and you know, that could have been cool, but it's a bit lackluster. So let's talk about it. We have a couple evil hero names in cards like Malicious Edge, Infernal Gainer, Infernal Prodigy. That's cool. That's nice. Would have loved to see the Adjusted Gold or the Sinister Necrom, I think. One of those two could have been really nice for the deck, but that's neither here nor there. Additionally, we also have the classic crew of Elemental Hero monsters. These aren't great. These are really bad monsters, but I understand why they're here. Moving on, we also have cards like Sandmoth, which is, in my opinion, a shitty card. Versago, I get it. Fusion Substitute monster, it's also a fiend, makes sense. Dark Ruler Hades, great card, but I don't think it fits in this strategy. Absorbing Jar, it's an interesting choice, but I mean, I get we need backward removal, but I would have liked to see something else for the rock monsters. Moving on, we have some spell cards. The spell cards are pretty good, all things considered. Dark Fusion is phenomenal. It's just polymerization, but with the extra benefit of giving your monster targeted protection, which is great. Dark Calling, that's just Miracle Fusion, but for the evil hero strategy, which is awesome. Evil Mind seems like it's a decent card, but then in practice, actually sucks a lot more than you might think. Dark World Lightning, I like this card a lot, but I don't think it makes that much sense once I start getting into the as to the why. Super Poly, in most scenarios, this would be a broken card, but given the skill the deck has, kinda sucks. And finally, the trap cards. Hero Signal is always nice to see in hero decks. Dark Deal is not good, and Windstorm of Etiqua, phenomenal card. I like this card a lot. Wrapping up the monsters, we have the fusions, and all things considered, the fusions are great. These are all just upgraded versions of the original Jaden deck, but my main issue is that most of the cards in this deck require named monsters. The Versago does make it easier to make these cards, but it's still an issue. And finally, the evil hero Dark Gaia is kind of a disappointing boss monster, given the skill that you're expected to play with. So we'll say that. Alright, so let's talk about why I don't like the addition of cards like Dark World Lightning, Hades, or the Dark Deal. The main reason for this is because they seem to be trying to push this whole discard aspect of the deck that doesn't really work because you don't have any monsters that particularly benefit from being discarded. You could make the argument that you're discarding them so you can use Dark Calling, but I don't think that's enough of a reason to start dwindling resources. I would have preferred if they changed out the Dark Ruler Hades with maybe like a Dark World like Lucent or what's the other one, like Latium. I might be wrong on the name of them, but they're the 2 level 6 Dark World monsters. They're not that strong. They're actually kind of mid, but they do get benefits from being discarded. So I would have liked to see those cards instead of Hades. And also, I feel like it makes sense given in the anime just because the Dark Worlds were part of like Jaden's army. So, but you know, it's whatever. But yeah, now let's just go ahead and discuss the skill. I've been alluding to it quite a bit, and let me explain why I don't like it. Okay, so his skill is Ruthless Means, and the skill reads, once per duel, during your main phase, if you control an evil hero monster, you can discard 1 card to make one face-up monster your opponent controls lose attack equal to its defense or lose defense equal to its own attack, your choice. This skill seems fine because it's a pretty powerful skill, being able to just dwindle the attack of an opponent's monster very severely. It's not that bad. But then you take into consideration you have to control an evil hero monster. The main deck has 3 choices, and one of them is a tribute monster. And the extra deck, they're all great cards, but as I mentioned, they're not the easiest cards to make. In decks like these, sealed decks in general, making fusion cards is really difficult unless you have a broken skill that allows you to do so, like the Cyberblader strategy. That's why I don't really like this skill. And because of this, I feel like this deck isn't that good. It has a lot of really good stuff in it. But my main issue is that, for one, the monster quality is pretty poor. You're going to be struggling with strategies that have a lot of aggressive beatdown in it that can do it really quickly. 2, it's not that consistent. You don't have all that much searchability besides like the hero signal and I guess the evil mind, but that's not that consistent either. A lot of this just kind of makes me feel like, I don't like it. I feel like it would have bumped it up significantly if they had gone the Dusted Gold, which is able to search out an evil hero card. And I feel like it would have been fine just because the quality of the cards in the format would have been decent enough where it would not make an issue. Thinking about it more and more now, low-key I kind of want to put it in D. The power output for the deck is really good, but it is just very inconsistent, especially in my test hands. I did like 10 test hands and like 8 of them were unplayable or like really bad. But oh my god, am I actually gonna do this? I am really sorry to any fan of this deck. The sealed version of it is not good. It's gonna go right here, I think. I genuinely think I'd rather play the Ojama strategy or the Water Dragon strategy over this one if I were doing a sealed tournament. But yeah. Let me know in the comment section below. Do you think it's better than this? Am I just sleeping on it too much? As I said, I tested it out multiple times and every single time I was more and more disappointed. Alright, that being said, let's move on to the next. Alright then, so next deck up we have is Red Eyes, and this is Nightshroud's deck, and I think this is A tier. This is an A tier strategy, and it is, oh my god, it is so strong. Let's go ahead and talk about it. So, Nightshroud has the Red Eyes strategy that revolves around making Red Eyes Darkness Dragon, and you know what, Red Eyes Darkness Dragon is kind of a mid card. It doesn't really do much to advance the game state, so it's like a whatever card. Red Eyes Black Dragon is not a good card to have in your deck, but it makes sense in this strategy. So let's go ahead and talk about all the other cards in the deck. I like the addition of cards like Luster Dragon and Luster Dragon number 2. 2 just all around decent cards. Luster Dragon in particular is really nice, just having a large beat stick available to you. Red Eyes Wyvern is pretty decent. Black Metal Dragon is insanely good. Troop Dragon, you get, I believe, 2 or 3 copies of this card, so it's always nice to have recursion in the deck. Mirage Dragon is a better version of Wild Edge with higher attack stat, so that's always great. Spear Dragon is phenomenal for applying pressure on your opponent. Vanguard as well, just getting a large monster on your field and setting up the graveyard. And Totem Dragon is a card that I prefer to go ahead and benefit cards like Red Eyes Black Dragon. So also another great card. Moving on to the spell cards, we have cards like, well, the spell card and trap card lineup I like a ton. alongside with the monsters. So Stamping Destruction and Cosmic Cyclone is insane in this, because not only you have two consistent ways of dealing with your opponent's back row in a beatdown strategy. That's so good. Dragon's Gunfire is even a decent card, being able to like either close out close games with the 800 burn damage, or just randomly being able to out weird monsters with the destruction effect here. And Swing of Memories is not even that bad either, just being able to revive a vanilla, more specifically your Red Ice Black Dragon, for like a whole turn. The downside is that it does get destroyed during the end phase, but that's not even that bad, especially once you consider the skill the deck has. Moving on, we have cards like Dragon's Rage, giving piercing damage to every dragon monster on your board, which is always awesome. Negate Attack, it's whatever. And Red Ice Spirit is just a better version of Swing of Memories for Red Ice monsters specifically, so that's always welcomed. As you can see, the card lineup is really good. The deck knows what it's doing. It's Dragon Beatdown, and it does it very well. Now let's move on to the skill. The skill for this deck is Forged Steel, and this skill is ridiculous. It is a really good skill. Alright, it reads: once per duel, during your main phase, you can change the name of one Red Ice monster or dragon normal monster you control to Red Ice Black Dragon. This is huge. While it's face up on the field, each Red Ice Darkness Dragon you control gains the following effect. Once per turn, during your main phase, you can special main one dragon monster from your graveyard that can be normal or set. This is an insane skill. It's a very consistent skill that allows you to just bring out your Red Ice Darkness Dragon very easily, which is like the boss monster of the deck, and additionally, it turns that Red Ice Darkness Dragon into an actual viable boss monster, giving it the ability of Red Ice Darkness Metal Dragon, one of the strongest pieces of support Dragon decks ever got. I think at one point the card got banned, and it even got eroded in the TCG. That's just how good this card is, and to have access to it via skill is amazing. The main reason that I have this deck in A tier and not S tier is that, for one, the deck doesn't have a way to access its boss monster, which does hinder it, because you're able to do some really good beatdown, which is awesome. But to get to the win con of the deck is not as, you have to get lucky in order to get that Darkness Dragon, which prevents me from putting it in S tier. Besides that, there's no other real flaw to the strategy, and I love this deck so much. This might actually just be the upper echelon of A tier decks. It is a really good strategy. I cannot stress that enough. Alright, let's move on to the next. Alrighty then, so next up we have Vampires, and I believe the character's name is Camilla. So her strategy is, it's a S tier. Yep, it's top of S tier. This deck is ridiculous, and let's go ahead and talk about it. Alright, so taking a look at Camilla's deck, we can see a lot of similarities between this one and the Red Eye strategy. This strategy prioritizes making Vampire Genesis and has a ton of vampire monsters and zombies in general, which vampires are zombies, but you get what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and talk about all the cards within it. We have some stinkers, like cards like Vampire Baby, which is a whatever card, Plague Wolf, and yeah, you know what? These are like the real stinkers of the deck, and they're not even that bad. But then you have a ton of really good cards. Like, for example, Familiar, Retainer, Sorcerer, and hell, even Goblin Zombie are all consistency pieces the deck has access to. Cards like Vampire Sorceress just searches out a vampire card. Vampire Retainer and Familiar both have a similar effect, where if they're special summoned, you can pay 500 life points to search a vampire monster in Familiar or a vampire spell in Retainer. But besides that, we also have pretty decent monsters in Vampire Lady, which is able to do a similar effect to Vampire Lord. Which, speaking of, there's a bunch of pseudo boss monsters in the deck, like Vampire Lord, Vampire's Curse, and Ryokoki. And Ryokoki is probably the worst of the three, but it's pretty good still, given that it's able to just beat any warrior or spellcaster monster your opponent may control. And these are really common types. But back to the Vampire Curse and Lord. These two cards in particular are a pain to deal with. Vampire Lord, you're forced to out it via battle, which isn't the easiest thing whenever your opponent has a lot of pressure on you, because if you just destroy this card by a card effect, it's able to come back the next turn for free, essentially. While Vampire's Curse forces you to out it via card effect, because if you add it by battle, it comes back to the field with 500 extra attack points, which is really rough. to deal with. However, the quality of the cards doesn't even stop there. We also have a card like Zombina in this deck that is able just to special summon any monster from your graveyard that's level 4 or lower whenever it's destroyed by any means, which is insane. Overall, I think the monster lineup in this deck is extremely solid, and the deck doesn't let up with the spells and trap cards either. Let's go ahead and talk about them. So, starting off with the spell lineup. In my opinion, probably is the weakest spell they have access to, that being Call the Mummy, and that's saying a lot, because Call the Mummy essentially lets you cheat out the whole deck, with the exception of Genesis. You can just summon any zombie from your hand, and that is ridiculous. But moving on, we also have cards like Book of Life, which is just a monster reborn for the deck, with the added benefit of just banishing a monster from your opponent's graveyard. You have Foolish Burial, which sets up a lot of your plays. You have Soul Exchange. You have 3 tribute monsters in the deck that love to use this card, and they're all 1 tribute monsters. So this card is phenomenal in this strategy. Vampire's Desire, really good card. This is a Foolish Burial or a Monster Reborn if you wanted to. Card's phenomenal. Insane that it's in here. But the trap cards are just as good. We have the first trap card here, the Forceful Checkpoint, which is a negate attack alongside looking at your opponent's hand and ripping a monster from there. That's insane. Getting hand information is one of the strongest effects you can get in the game. And finally, Vampire's Awakening just lets you summon a vampire from the deck. It's... that's wild. Meaning that if you open this card, it just lets you summon, like, for example, the Familiar or the Retainer just to get any of your plays going if you wanted to, which is always great. But now let's move on to the skill. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is a deck that is very reminiscent of the first deck we covered, because this skill, Vampire Aristocracy, does the following. Once per duel, during your main phase, you can change the name of one zombie vampire monster you control to Vampire Lord. While it's face up on the field, each Vampire Genesis you control gains the following effect. If this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target one card in your opponent's graveyard, set it to your field. Being able to just get resources from your opponent's graveyard is very powerful as well. Being able to take a monster or a spell trap card from their grave is really nice. And the reason I like this skill way better is that your boss monster, Vampire Genesis, is searchable via the effect of Familiar, I believe. I get these cards mixed up all the time, but you're able to search it because it's a vampire, and that is huge. Also, we went ahead and talked about how this deck has a ton of consistency, resources, and the power output is very nice. That's why I believe that this is like one of the top of S tier decks. It is extremely well crafted, well developed. It's really good. I might be glazing it way too much, but in my opinion, this is one of the most peak designs for a strategy in Speed Duels, at least for the sealed format. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section below though. Alright, so next up we have Amazonas, and what's the name of this card? Tania, I believe. Tania's Amazonas strategy belongs in A tier. Yeah, no, this is a really good strategy as well. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Alright then, so Tania's Amazonas strategy revolves around, honestly, everything. The whole strategy is the beatdown strategy where you're just trying to use your Amazonas monsters alongside your various spell and trap cards to just absolutely stomp on your opponent. And if you ever summon your Amazonas Queen, you're just making that job a lot easier. So let's go ahead and dive in as to what I mean by all this. So the boss monster of the deck is Amazonas Queen, which is a pretty decent boss monster, all things considered. It's a level 6, it's easy enough to summon, and it gives all your Amazonas monsters battle protection, which is not bad at all. Then we have cards like Amazonas Swordswoman, which is a not bad card just because it randomly can just win you games with its reverse burn damage effect it has. Amazonas Tiger protects your Amazonas cards and it can get pretty decent size. Amazonas Paladin, same thing, it can get pretty big as well. Chainmaster is cute because it has the effect where you can pay 1500 life points to just steal a monster from your opponent's hand, which is pretty cool. Amazonas Trainee, again, it's a decent card because it's able to get pretty big if you're able to get it going. Amazonas Sage is a really good monster for the deck just because it's able to destroy back row. However, my main issue with it is that it's really small, only at 1400 attack points. And finally, Battle Survivor is just a really good piece of warrior support for these kind of decks. So I don't mind that at all. Onto the spell cards now. We have a pretty decent lineup, I'm not gonna lie. We have cards like Reinforcement of the Army, which is always nice for warrior decks. We have Amazonas Heirloom, a An awful equip spell to deal with. This is one of the most annoying to deal with, I'm not gonna lie. And if you've ever faced off against an Amazoness deck, at least in this format, you'll know just how annoying this is. Moving on, we have Amazoness Village, which is a really good field spell for the deck, being able to give them all a very much needed attack boost, alongside if any of your Amazoness cards gets destroyed, summoning another one from the deck with an equal or lower level than the one destroyed. Awesome. Amazoness Fighting Spirit is just skyscrapers for Amazoness, which is not bad at all. And finally, Amazoness Spellcaster is a really jank card, but it randomly just lets you out any opponent's monster, being able to switch out their attack with the Amazoness monster's attack. Really weird card, but it works. So I think it's cool. And finally, for the trap cards, this is one of the decks that has the most amount of traps that I've seen so far. We have a total of 5 of them, and they're all pretty decent also. Amazoness Archers is really nice just because it's able to reduce the attack of all your opponent's monsters by 500, which is a really good amount. Amazoness Willpower is just a Call the Haunted for the Amazoness strategy, which isn't bad at all. Dramatic Rescue is interesting just because whenever an Amazoness card is targeted, you're able to bounce it back to the hand and replace it with another one, which is one of the ways you can cheat out your Amazoness Queen, which is pretty cool. Queen's Pawn is really nice just because it allows you to apply a ton of pressure. And finally, Half Counter might as well just be Sakuretsu Armor in this deck, which is a really good card. So I like it a lot. Overall, yeah, the lineup is pretty decent. The deck does one thing. It's a one-trick pony, but goddamn, is that trick really good. Alright, but as for the skill isn't that bad either. I remember when I first read it for the first time, I was a bit underwhelmed, but it makes sense and it's not that bad. So let's go ahead and read it. The skill's name is Welcome to the Jungle, and it does the following. After damage calculation, if you took battle damage from battle involving an opponent's monster and your attack position Amazoness monster, that opponent's monster loses attack and defense equal to the attack of the Amazoness monster it battled until the end of this turn. The whole idea about this card is that you're supposed to have your smaller Amazoness cards crash into your opponent's bigger monsters to go ahead and weaken them enough so your other Amazoness cards are able to just run them over, which makes sense. And with cards like Amazoness Village on the field, you still gain a lot of advantage from that, so it's not even the worst thing ever. But the skill is pretty good overall. It has no once per duel clause, which would have been bad, no once per turn clause. It's whenever you take battle damage from battle involving your Amazoness card, it will activate, which is insane, and you're meaning that you can abuse it quite a bit. Besides that, the main issue the deck has is, as I said, it's a one-trick pony. It does one thing, but it does it very effectively. As well, it doesn't have prevalent back removal, which is one of the things that a deck like this really needs in order to flourish. Because if you can't deal with your opponent's back row that deals with your monsters on your field, you're gonna have a really hard time getting back into the duel. And Paladin is not gonna cut it as your back removal option, so that's why we need it to be here. We can't put it above the Red Eye strategy because the Red Eye strategy is a very balanced strategy that knows what it's trying to do. So I think A tier fits it very well. I think it's significantly better than any of the decks we've seen so far, so it belongs here. Alright, moving on now. Next deck up we have is Archfiend, and this is Titan, I believe. Honestly, I think this is a B tier strategy. I think just below Roids, honestly. Yeah, I think that's where it belongs. Alright, let's go ahead and talk about it. Alright then, so we have the Archfiend strategy right here, and as you can see, we are dealing with the chess Archfiends. In my personal opinion, this is my least favorite version of Archfiends, like the subtype of Archfiends. I think they're not that good in my opinion, but in Speed Duels, they're okay. So let's go ahead and talk about them. First off, let's go ahead and clear up a few things about the chess Archfiend strategy as a whole and what they have going on for them. They all have two specific gimmicks. First, they all have a maintenance cost. They all vary in how much you have to pay for each of them, but each one of them has a maintenance cost, as well as most of them, not all of them, but most of them have a protection effect from being targeted, where you have to roll a die in order to dictate whether or not they get protected. And I think it's like really silly, really goofy, and it's not worth the maintenance cost in my opinion. All right, so first card up we have is Skull Archfiend of Lightning, which is I guess meant to be a upgrade version of Summon Skull. In my opinion, I think I'd rather have Summon Skull, but that's just me. Moving on, we have a card like Archfiend Soldier, which is great, just being able to summon having a normal summonable 1900 attack monster is awesome. Next up, we have King Archfiend, which is alright. While we're talking about Archfiend, let's go and bring up the other large guys for the Archfiend strategy. So it's King Archfiend, we have Shadow Knight Archfiend, and as well Archfiend General. All of these guys are meant to be like the normal summonable guys that are just meant to deal massive damage. But they also have a pretty sizable maintenance cost, with the exception of General. Alongside, we also have the smaller chess pieces. We have the Queen, the Pawn, the Knight, the Bishop, and the Rook. They're not great cards, in my opinion. They're not phenomenal. Besides the Archfiend cards, we also have a good amount of like decent monsters, like Giant Orc, which is just a massive guy that deals a shit ton of damage. We have Miss Archfiend, which is a in my opinion, the best Archfiend in this deck. And the boss monster of the deck is meant to be Annihilator Archfiend, which is an interesting choice of a boss monster. It's not that bad of a card. It's able to apply a lot of pressure on your opponent, being able to pop cards in your field, like the Scrap archetype with Scrap Dragon, and then it gains attack based on the monster you destroyed, which it can get pretty big. So it's an okay card. I don't mind it at all. Onto the spell cards now, and trap cards. And I'll say this, I think this is one of the weaker points of this deck. The best aspects of it, it's the monster lineup. So for the spell cards, we have cards like Pandemonium, which is the field spell, the dedicated field spell of the Archfiend, Chess Archfiend strategy. It keeps you from paying their maintenance cost, which is huge, alongside giving you some level of recursion by adding an Archfiend monster to your hand whenever one of yours is destroyed. However, it has to be a lower level than the one destroyed, which does suck. Checkmate is bad. Axe of Despair, phenomenal card. Really good, because you need this in order to deal big damage to your opponent. Double Spell, it's whatever. And as for the trap cards, they're not great. Archfiend's Roar is a really bad revival card. For one, it's a trap. For two, there's a cost. And for three, you can't do really anything with the card you summon. So that's really bad. And it dies at the end phase. So I don't like this card at all. Battle Scared, bad card. And Bark of Dark Ruler, it's whatever. I think that's the main issue of the deck. It forces you to use way too many of your life points for very minimal gain. But let's move on to the skill now. So the skill the deck has is I'm mixed about it. I neither love it nor do I hate it. So let's go ahead and talk about it. So the skill's name is Archfiend's Conscription, and it reads: you can't normal summon or set non-fiend monsters. Once per turn during your main phase, you can roll a 6-sided die. If you do, you lose life points equal to the results times 200, which is a pretty decent chunk. But if the results are 2, 3, or 4, you can special summon one Archfiend monster with level equal to the results from your hand, deck, or graveyard. If this skill was phrased a little differently, I think I would love the skill. The main issues that I have with it is that you lose life points regardless of what you roll. So if you roll a 6, or a 5, or a 1, so half the rolls in the die, you're gonna lose a good amount of life points. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you're taking either 1,000 or 1,200 life points of damage, and the deck already does a good amount of burn damage to yourself. This means that you don't have a lot of longevity in a duel, and you have to beat your opponent really fast. And even if you do get the proper roll of the die, you're gonna be either summoning a really bad card like what is it? Vilepon, Queen. The options you're summoning aren't even that good. The good options are like the Deathstroke, the Shadow Knight. What's the other one? I can't remember. But the level 4s are like the best option, but you're still taking the burn damage. So it's like, I don't know. And the restriction of only summoning fiend cards doesn't really matter. That's all you're summoning in the deck anyway. I really feel like the deck would have benefited it if they had cards like Draining Shield maybe, or Golden Ladybug, in order to like bypass their maintenance cost. Just so, because the deck will kill you really fast if you don't take care of your opponent effectively. But, however, the deck knows what it's trying to do. It is a beatdown strategy through and through, and it does that very effectively as well. But I still don't think it exceeds what the Roid strategy is able to do. So it's gonna go below it. I think it's better than the Cyberduck strategy, but not better than this. It's just a worse version of Amazoness, honestly, but not bad. So next up we have is the Professor Banner's Alchemy deck, and I think this might be a hot take, but This is low B tier. I think this is a better strategy than the Ancient Gear one. And this took me a minute to realize, because I remember my first initial look at the deck, I'm like, this kind of sucks, but in reality, it's actually pretty good. Let's talk about it. Alright then, so the Alchemy deck is based on banishing, and you're going to be banishing quite a bit in this deck. Pretty much every card in this deck deals with it. We have Golden Homunculi, which is a funny card to have in the deck. It's not that good of a boss monster. It's a level 6, so you need to tribute summon for it, and at that it has a very weak stat line to begin with. But it gets slightly better once you take the skill into consideration. We also have cards like Bazoo the Soul Eater, which is a phenomenal card. I love this card. One of my all-time favorite GOAT era cards. Really great card to have access to in this deck. We also have the 2 motorcycle driver guys. Both of them are pretty decent. If you're able to enable them, they can be really annoying for your opponent to deal with. But the best cards in the deck, in my opinion, are the DDDs. Cards like DDD Survivor, DD Scout Plane, DDD Destroyer, DDD Crow. These cards are great, especially when you take into consideration their skill. Survivor and Scout Plane are able to come back every single time they get banished. DD Destroyer, whenever it gets destroyed and banished, it goes and destroys the card on your opponent's side of the field. DD Crow, it's just able to take resources away from your opponent's graveyard. This is more niche because in this sealed environment, the graveyard isn't as much of a resource, but still it does come up. The Different Dimension Master is interesting. I don't love this in the deck, especially being a level 5, but it's interesting. It's not bad. Banisher of the Radiance, really good card. Let's move on. We have Grand Maju the Irza. It's not good. It pains me to say that because I think Grand Maju is really cool, but this card's not good in this strategy. It's too small. It needs way too many cards in the banish zone to be able to make use of it. So, unfortunately, not doing much in the deck. And the final card of the deck, Tribe Shocking Virus. I initially thought this was going to be a pretty bad card, but then I looked at the lineup of cards you have in the deck. You have Warriors, Fiends, Wing Beasts, Fairies, Spellcasters, Machine, Beast, Pyro. You have quite a bit in order to enable this card, so it's not honestly that bad. It has a decent stat line as well. So you're able to deal with a good amount of decks with this card alone. So I don't mind it. Onto the spell cards, we have cards like Soul Release. This is really nice, being able to just banish cards from your opponent's graveyard. Galaxy Cyclone, a phenomenal piece of back removal. Grand Convergence. This card is so funny, and it is one of the coolest things to resolve on your opponent, because not only does it destroy all your opponent's monsters on the field while you control Macrocosmo, that is the catch, it also burns them for however many you destroy, which is insane. Different Dimension Gate is cute. Different Dimension Encounter is interesting, just being able to summon a card that is banished, but it also does summon one for your opponent's grave, banished one as well, so, you know, I have mixed feelings about it. Macrocosmo, if you're able to get it going, could be detrimental to your opponent. And Curse of Aging, I like it. It's just because all your monsters aren't that big. They can get pretty big, but they're not big initially, so if you're able to resolve this, it can really put you in an advantageous position. But let's go ahead and talk about the skill now. And the skill this deck has, I think, brings the strategy together. So the skill is Professor of Alchemy, and it reads, Alchemy Beast tokens can attack directly. Once per turn during your main phase, you can banish one level 4 lower monster from your hand or face up field to special summon one Alchemy Beast token. It's a level 3 rock monster with 500 attack and 500 defense points with the same attribute as the banished monster. It can't be tributed except for the tribute summon of a Golden Homunculi. So this is where I alluded to earlier. The Golden Homunculi becomes slightly better with this skill because if you're able to banish cards like the DD Survivor, the DD Scout Plane, or even the Beast, these you get some really good benefits from doing so because the DD Survivor, if it's banished from the field, it's able to special summon itself during the end phase. The Scout Plane from anywhere, I believe, it's able to special summon itself. So this means that if you're able to get that token on the field, you can then tribute it off to summon the Golden Homunculi and you can get some plays going. It's a little more niche, but I like it because you're able to enable quite a bit with the deck. Also, it has that sneaky 500 damage direct attack effect as well. So at random points, that could really add up, especially with the with each player only having 4,000 light points. That could prove to be really, really powerful at random points during the duel. Overall, I think the skill really ties it together, and the deck does a really decent job of just beating down as well. Overall, this deck exceeds what a C tier deck would do. And in my personal opinion, I think it's actually better than the Ancient Gear strategy in what it's trying to do. It doesn't have the power output that the Ancient Gear strategy has, but it has more consistency in being able to beat down more effectively. So that's just my personal opinion. You guys might differ than me, but this is what I think. Okay, we're down to our last two decks, and next up we have is the Sacred Beast deck. I forgot the character that uses this, the name of them, but this is like a D. This is an F tier deck. I'm sorry, guys. This deck is really bad. The funny thing is, the deck becomes significantly better depending on the skill it has. I think if it has the other skill, it goes up to like a C tier, maybe a B tier deck, but with the skill it has, it's an F tier. It's actually kind of crazy how much a skill changes things. Okay, so the deck we have here is the Sacred Beast strategy, and yeah, there's not much to say about it. You're trying to bring out the Sacred Beast monsters, and the thing is, all these cards have very convoluted ways of being special summoned. The Uriah needs multiple continuous trap cards on the field to summon it. The Haman needs multiple continuous spell cards to summon it, and the Raviel needs 3 fiend monsters on the field in order to special summon it. The effects of these cards, it's pretty good. I like them a lot, but summoning them is not the easiest thing in the world. Moving on, we have cards like Dark Summoning Beast. This card would be great because it's able just to cheat them out of the deck, but it's a level 5, which is really bad. Moving on, we have a card like Mad Reloader. This card could be good because it gives you some level of consistency, but often enough, the cards you're drawing aren't even that good. D-Boys is funny. I forget how many you get in the deck, but I believe it's 2. I could be wrong. It could be 3, but I believe it's 2. And this card is funny. I think it's cool, but it's not great. You take 1,000 damage for each D-boy you summon, and at that they're summoned in attack position with these really sad stat lines. Next card up is Gravity Orb, which has a cute effect where it's just able to change the battle position of all cards on the field, but it's not surviving the battle phase. Goblin King is cool. It's a pseudo boss monster of the deck. That can get pretty big because there's quite a bit of fiend monsters in the deck. Actually, most of the monsters in the deck are fiends. So you could realistically build a strategy out of this, but it's a non-searchable boss monster of the deck also, and it needs setup. Great Protector is okay. It's only okay. So yeah. And onto the spell cards now. And I am not a huge fan of them. Fallen Paradise is a phenomenal field spell. However, you need to control the Sacred Beast monsters for this field spell to do anything, and that's not that easy to do, especially with the skill it has. Next card up is Cerulean Skyfire, which is one of the newer support pieces for Haman specifically, and the card is good, but it doesn't really do much in this deck specifically. Veil of Darkness is okay. It's whatever. And Backup Squad, I get what they were doing with the cards like Veil of Darkness and Backup Squad along with like the Mad Reloader, but it's not doing enough for you in order to make the deck consistent. Next cards up is a shit ton of continuous traps. Cards like Awakening of the Sacred Beast, which does nothing because you're not going to control your Sacred Beast monster often enough. Unending Nightmare is a good card, but it only destroys face of spell and trap cards your opponent controls, and at that you have to pay 1,000 life points, which is very rough. Age of Gaia, they knew you were going to be taking massive damage in this deck, but it's whatever. Swamp Mirror, I like it just because it doubles as either helping you summon out the Uriah or the Haman, not the Haman, my bad, the Raviel. And Final Attack Order, I don't know why you have this card in the deck. Your deck is not built that way. You're not going to be resolving this because you'd rather have your cards in defense mode until you have your Sacred Beast. As you can see, this is really bad, but the skill makes it worse. All right, so I know the name of the character. It's Kagemaru, and their skill is Unlocking the Power. And essentially what this skill does is it allows you to summon the Uriah, the Haman, or the Raviel using their own dedicated mechanics. So if you had multiple fiend monsters on the field, you can summon the Uriah or the Haman. If you control multiple like continuous trap cards, you can summon any of them, or multiple continuous spell cards, which is a cool concept. But let's face it, these the conditions are so difficult to resolve, it's not gonna be happening often. You know, the deck isn't doing what it needs to. I'll just say that. It's actually really unfortunate that it has to go in F tier. It's just the monster lineup is piss poor. The spells are not great. The traps are mediocre, and the boss monsters are not that easy to summon. So it's just like, it's an 0 for 3, honestly. The only reason I have it above the Gate Guardian strategy is just because realistically the boss monsters are easier to summon than the Gate Guardian is. So that's the only reason. Because you could have that magical hand where you open those 4 cards that does it. You could open up the, let's say, Hamon's probably the best. The Hamon with 3 continuous spells or 3 continuous trap cards, and you just set them on and you summon the Hamon. Cool, but that's just not gonna cut it for me, honestly. So that's why it's an F tier. Alright then, so last deck up is Cloudian, Adrian Gecko's strategy, and this is honestly, I think this is between a top of B tier to low of A tier strategy. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I think I'm gonna put it low B tier. I mean high B tier. I might change my mind this in the future, but I think this is where it belongs, and I'll explain why. Alright then, so here we have the deck. It's Adrian Gecko's Cloudian strategy, and before we talk about it, I do want to mention this. I think it's awesome that Speed Duels made Cloudians an actual playable strategy. That's really, really cool. I think it's a really fun strategy. Alright, so we can see here that we have 2 of the boss monsters of the deck, Fog King and Eye of the Typhoon. Fog King is interesting just because it does have a floodgate effect and it has the potential of being really big, but I feel like those 2 benefits of it are fairly niche to difficult to resolve, so it's kind of like a whatever card for me. Eye of the Typhoon, I believe, is meant to be the dedicated boss monster of the deck. Also, it has an interesting effect where it's able just to change the battle position of all your opponent's monsters. One of the things that I actually forgot to mention at the beginning about the Cloudian cards is that they all share a similar gimmick in the fact that they cannot be destroyed by battle, which is both a benefit and a downside to the cards. And if they're ever changed into defense position, they get destroyed via their own effect. So that's a really big downside. Alright, so moving on to the smaller Cloudian monsters, and a new gimmick develops with the smaller ones as well. That being the fog counter gimmick, where they're able to remove fog counters to do various effects. As a cloud, they will destroy a spell trap card your opponent controls. Atlas is able to rip cards to your opponent's hand. Zero Stratus is able to destroy a monster on the field. Ghost Fog is able to distribute fog counters it has on it to monsters on the field, whatever you want. Turbulence is able to summon smoke balls from the deck, which is kind of funny. Nimbus Man is another pseudo boss monster of the deck because it's able to get huge based on the amount of fog counters on the field. Storm Dragon is actually a easily special summonable card, fairly easy, and that's pretty much the Cloudian lineup. Next up, we just have support pieces for the deck in Vortex Trooper, which is able just to shuffle 2 cards in your deck to just draw 2 more. So I guess if you have any duds in your hand, you can just get rid of them. So it's not that bad of an effect. Mother Grizzly is able to give you access to pretty much every Cloudian in your deck, which is really nice. We now move on to the spell cards, and we have some pretty good ones. Cloudian Aerosol is an insane card, honestly. It's really, really good support for the Cloudian strategy. For one, it allows you to discard a Cloudian monster from your hand to then disperse fog counters onto cards on the field equal to the level of that monster. Also, during the next turn, it's sent to the graveyard. You're able to banish to special summon a Cloudian from the deck, and sometimes you're just able to close out games with that effect. Next up, we have a card like Cloudian Squall, which is able to distribute fog counters on the field, and with the skill this deck has access to, it becomes very, very deadly. Summon Cloud is just a better version of the card like called the Mummy because it's also able to access cards from the graveyard, so it just lets you cheat out Cloudian monsters from your hand or grave, given that they're level 4 or lower, which is really nice. Diamond Dust Cyclone is cool, but really hard to pull off. Fog Control is interesting, and that's the spell lineup. Onto the traps now, and the traps are pretty decent actually. So Raging Cloudian is a card that I have mixed feelings about because I feel like it's too specific to be good, but it does give your Cloudian monsters a slight level of protection from being changed into defense position. Rainstorm is a really interesting card because you're able to take one of your Cloudian monsters and reduce its attack by either 1,000 or 2,000, which is a really big amount, I'll say that. And if you do, you get different effects based on it. If you reduce the opponent's, if you reduce that monster by 1,000, you're able to destroy an opponent's spell or trap card. But if you reduce it by 2,000, you're able to destroy any 2 cards your opponent may control, which is a really powerful effect. So this card is, honestly, it has the potential of being very, very, very good. Last up for the trap cards, we have Wall of Disruption, honestly, one of the best trap cards in the game. Just being able to reduce the attack of all your opponent's monsters by 800 is huge, especially in this deck where all your monsters are really small. But now on to the skill. And honestly, this skill is very simple, but it ties the whole deck together. The skill name is Fog Warning, and it does the following. Each time you place a fog counter or counters on a monster or monsters, give it 1 additional fog counter. So essentially, whenever you summon a Cloudian monster, their effect's going to be live because they're going to gain a fog counter off their own effect, and then they're going to gain 1 additional off the Fog Warning. So cards like Acid Cloud, and I forgot the other one, I think it's like Ceruleus Nimbus or something like that, they can just destroy back row or monsters on the field, which is very, very strong, especially if you have a card like Squall on the field, which is just able to distribute more and more counters. If you're able to get like a board like that, you're able to take control of the duel very, very fast. And your opponent's going to struggle to deal with you because you're not able to get rid of those Cloudian monsters unless you have card effects to do so, which makes this a really, really good control strategy. However, my main issue with the Cloudian strategy is that because all the Cloudian cards are so small and can't be changed to defense position, it leaves you open to a lot of really aggressive strategies to beat down on you. And that can prove to be really, really detrimental. I think the deck has a better game plan than most of these decks over here, but it can't compete with these ones, a pure belief, because they are just way too aggressive for Cloudian to deal with. But yeah. Alright, and with that, this concludes part 3 of the tier listing. As I said, Duels of the Shadows is one of my all-time favorite boxes that we've gotten so far in Speed Duels. And as you can see, it gave us a ton, and I mean a ton of great strategies. Most of them are in the upper tiers. But if you haven't caught part 1 or part 2, I highly recommend you go check them out. I think I give a lot of really interesting introspective looks and ideas as to why I tiered each deck where I did. And while you're checking out some of my videos, I highly recommend checking out my progression series or my sealed series with my good buddies. I think they're a lot of fun to check out. But until next time, thank you so much for stopping by. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing. It helps small channels like myself tremendously. I appreciate it a lot. But again, thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate you guys a ton, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.